"Hey, babe, what happened?" Alex asked his wife, who lay on the bed looking completely exhausted. "Nothing. I'm just not feeling so great," Laura answered, tossing and turning in bed. "Why don't we go for a walk?" he suggested. "But I'm tired. I'll end up annoying you." "Of course not," Alex said. "Nothing matters more to me than making you feel better. I can do anything for that." Laura looked up at her husband, smiling and thinking how lucky she was. He helped her get out of bed and change as well. Laura was a cancer patient, and unfortunately her chemotherapy was taking longer to have an effect than they had expected. Doctors were worried because there had been no improvement at all. Luckily, she had her husband by her side, who tried his best to take care of her. "Why don't we go out to the forest today?" Alex suggested. "Wait, you said we'll go on a walk?" Laura laughed. "Now that I'm up, you want us to go so far? Very clever." "Nah," he laughed at the accusation. "The idea just came to my mind. I mean, wouldn't it be great to have some fresh air? The greenery of the forest always makes you feel better." Laura couldn't argue with that. She loved walking between those tall, beautiful trees. She resisted at first, but ended up agreeing. The couple got in their car and drove to the nearest woods for half an hour. Laura opened the car window, the wind blowing through the little bit of her hair she still had left. She took a deep breath and loved how the air smelt like the color green. It was so magical. They got to the location, and both husband and wife got out of the car. Walking to the nearest tree, they sat down on two big rocks to savor the moment. Alex got up and started to move toward the car, saying he was going to get something. Laura began to feel a bit tired again, so she rested her head on her knees. All of a sudden, she heard the car starting. She looked up and saw Alex sitting in the car, looking ahead as if he was ready to drive off. "Alex!" she yelled in the loudest voice she could manage to take out. "What are you doing?" "Die, you bitch," he said before driving off. Laura gathered her energy to get up and go after him. She walked a bit before she felt dizzy and had to sit down again. "Why did he do that?" she thought to herself. "Maybe he's just playing a prank on me," she reassured. She sat down, leaning against a tree again, waiting patiently for her husband to suddenly show up. Deep down, she knew what he had just done to her, but she wasn't ready to admit it. How would she survive through this if she had already lost hope? She thought back to the time the two of them had met. Laura was a successful real estate broker who was very wealthy for someone in their mid-20s. Unfortunately, she had terrible luck when it came to men. Finding a guy who wasn't after her for her money was hard, which is why she always remained single. But at times, being alone for so long makes a person desperate, and they begin to ignore the obvious. Alex was an electrician in his mid-20s that she had once hired to repair a house she was planning on selling. What started as a one-night stand between the two ended up becoming severe. Alex asked her to marry him, and being wooed by his poetry and affection, she said yes. However, Laura was probably the only person Alex was successful at fooling. Everyone around Laura, including her family and friends, tried to convince her that he was only with her for the money. They believed he didn't love her. According to them, the signs were undeniable. There was something else that pushed Laura to make that wrong decision. She had recently been diagnosed with cancer, so she hesitated to let go of Alex. She felt as if he was the only good thing she had in her life, and the way he cared for her made her feel exceptional. But that day, as she sat in the forest alone, she realized that she had made the biggest mistake of her life. She didn't leave him, but he undoubtedly left her. Laura lost track of time and how she had been waiting for him. All she knew was that the sun was beginning to set, which was a clear indication that he was not coming back. Every time she got up to walk toward the main road, she began to lose her breath, and her head would start to spin. She was all alone, ready to die. She fell asleep on the ground, unaware of all the insects that had begun to crawl on her. Suddenly, she felt her body move. She tried her best to gain control of herself, but she did not have the power to do so. Was she being kidnapped? Or had Alex come back to save her? Someone picked her up in their arms. She was so weak that she couldn't resist. She collected all her energy and slightly opened her eyes, just so she could identify the perpetrator in case something happened. She saw herself in the arms of a tall, well-built man with bronze-colored hair and a light beard. That was the most she could do before her eyes closed again as she lost consciousness. Laura's eyes opened in a strange new place. It was a tiny room made out of wood with antique furniture and decoration. She looked around herself and noticed no one else was in the room. The room was full of weird scents, as if different types of herbs were everywhere. She tried to get up, and to her surprise, it wasn't that difficult for her. She felt better, stronger. Is this the kidnapper's house? She thought to herself. Thank God he didn't hurt me. Just as she was about to get off the bed to escape, she heard the door open. He was here. Her kidnapper was here again. She looked towards the door, ready to defend herself against the tall man who had taken her. But to her surprise, an older woman in her 80s walked into the room. "Why, hello, dear," the old woman said in the sweetest voice that reminded Laura of her late grandmother. "You're finally awake." "Where am I?" Laura asked, completely taken by surprise. "Don't put so much stress on your body, love. You have barely started to get better." "I know, but can you please tell me where I am?" Laura asked again in a more excellent way this time. There was something about the older woman that made Laura feel comfortable. The older woman walked over to her, holding a bowl. "You're in my house. I'm Edith," she said, holding the bowl to Laura. "My neighbor, more like a son to me, found you in a deplorable condition in the forest. He carried you and brought you here to me." "You mean that tall guy with the bronze hair?" "Yes, Josh. Handsome young boy, isn't he? And let me tell you, he's equally good on the inside as well." Edith smiled. She picked up the spoon and began to feed Laura, who didn't hesitate to eat the soup. "But why did he bring me here?" she asked. "Why didn't he take me to a hospital?" "Well," Edith explained, "I'm a healer. I use herbal medicine to heal people. Josh knows this very well. Poor young lad regrets not knowing about me sooner, or he would have brought his wife here. She passed away a while back." "Oh," Laura was speechless. "But you see, you are feeling better now, aren't you? That's the thing about my medicine. People from all over the country visit me when the doctors say they have no chance of surviving. And you know what? They all end up feeling better. The same way I'm going to make you feel better, dear," Edith said with excitement and concern. Laura didn't object. It was true. She was feeling better, and with each passing day she continued to feel better. Laura wanted to go back and punish Alex for his actions, but she knew her health was more important than getting revenge. She stayed with Edith for over 3 months until she was fit as a woman her age could be. Edith lived in a small remote village on the other side of the forest, one that only had a few thousand inhabitants. Her time there passed by beautifully, both because of the love Edith gave her and also because of the handsome man who made sure to check on her every day. Josh was one of the most excellent men she knew, who had no idea about Laura's money. All he knew was that he cared for her and eventually fell in love with her. The feelings were mutual. Laura felt a strong bond develop between the two. And why wouldn't she? For the first time in her life, somebody loved her for who she was, not for what she had. When Laura's treatment had been completed, it was time for her to head back to the city and make her husband pay for what he did to her. But she didn't want to do this alone. She didn't want any lies in her life. One day she asked Josh to come and visit her at Edith's place, making sure Edith was there. That's when they knew that Laura was a multi-millionaire with property all over the state. They were left flabbergasted, but they understood her point of view after Laura explained why she had kept this fact hidden. As expected, Josh insisted on going to the city with her, to which Laura happily agreed. A few days later, the two of them set out and headed straight towards the house where Laura and Alex had been living. To their surprise, the house was locked, and it looked as if no one had been there for ages. They went around to ask the neighbors, and all of them were surprised to see Laura again after so long. Laura and Josh learned that Alex was in prison from them. He had hired an actress to pretend to be Laura to gain access to her bank. Fortunately, the bank employees were smart enough to recognize that it wasn't Laura standing in front of them. They called the police, and Alex and the actress were arrested for fraud. Laura was content, knowing that Alex had caused his downfall. His greed and heartlessness had ruined him, and now he would rot in jail with an additional charge of attempted murder. She divorced and began a new life with Josh. But she did not forget Edith, the woman she owed her life to. Laura and Josh made sure to visit her at least once a month, taking a break from the hectic city life and enjoying the serenity of the village. Apart from that, by selling some of her property, Laura set up a treatment center where Edith could work her magic and save even more lives.
Her name was Julie. She studied at an excellent, prestigious university. Julie and her friends often went to Cannes, Monaco, and Mallorca in Spain summer. They spent time at parties where Naomi Campbell, Irina Shayk, and other prominent personalities rested. The girls in her circle and she could afford the hotels where they party from morning to evening. They spent money without thinking about anything. They had many opportunities. They were all from wealthy families. Their parents did not spare cash for their beloved children. After such a fun vacation, they had to learn a lot. Famous and wealthy parents must have educated children. Frequent social events and news from magazines had to correspond to the statuses of their circle. At one of the college parties that the college kids were putting together, Julie met him, the different one. He didn't go to this university. He was called by someone who knew the faculty. Julie didn't expect anyone to impress her at first sight, and how could he be here? His unusual and closed nature caught her attention. Many guys tried to get to know her, but they were like everyone else in her circle. But that guy was very different from the other guys. There were no branded items on him. His bang covered his face slightly. He wasn't much of a talker, but there was something about him that immediately caught Julie's attention. He stood quietly aside and did not draw attention to himself. But not for Julie. For her, he became a center of interest. "John," he said quietly, and reached out to Julie. "Julie," she smiled back. The friends did not give much importance to their acquaintance, but a month later they were already walking hand in hand and could not take their eyes off each other. Their union was not in the spirit of all, but love was so burning that the young pair was regardless of others' opinions. They spent time together, as shown in the most romantic films. These were happy moments of their teenage life. They saw their future together. Together they dreamed a lot and had fun. Lovers enjoyed each other every day. John was from an ordinary family. His college, where he studied, had an urban planning direction. His parents worked at the factory and didn't really care about their son. He and Julie met on evenings after school. When they separated, they missed each other so much that they looked forward to an early meeting. Their love was visible from a distance. When they met, they spent time alone together. They were not bored at all together. They'd go out, talk about things, and always find something to do. Over time, their feelings began to diminish, and their different social statuses became more apparent in everyday life. As it happens, time passes and people's relationships stand still. John knew he had to act. He can't give Julie what she's so used to, that luxurious life. John dropped out of school and started working. He had less time to meet Julie. Julie didn't know what it was about because she was in a relationship. John believed that the financial component could hurt his self-esteem and he would lose his lover. John couldn't afford to live on someone else's dime. Without a good job, he couldn't live on the same level as Julie. He got an excellent job as an assistant architect. He worked a lot and stayed at work in the evenings. He had a clear goal, to achieve a good position, and he aspired to the same life as seen by his friends and Julie. She was irritated that John had less time to walk and spend with her. She tried to explain that she didn't need any of this. She was willing to live with her lover in any circumstances. John understood that it was all talk and nothing more. They couldn't have lived together for a long time in such different statuses. Living with Julie and not giving her what she was used to would sooner or later ruin their relationship. It was just a matter of time. After another year, which Julie finished perfectly, she got a call from her father. "Julie, congratulations on your successful graduation. I've arranged for you to go to further training in Paris." "But Dad, I don't want to go to Paris. My friends and John are here. I can finish my studies here," Julie said sadly. "This is not up for discussion. Either Paris or no entertainment and trips. You will live on your own with your John." Julie was still on the allowance her father threatened, or so she thought. Julie didn't want to upset her dad. She tried to finish her studies perfectly. Her father did so much for her. Her dad gave her a good education and fun and carefree childhood. In the evening, she called John to her room to talk. John did not understand why he had to go to Paris, so far and for a whole year. He didn't even have time to tell Julie about his promotion. His efforts were in vain, he thought. Julie had already decided, although it was difficult for her to tell John. She promised to come over for the holidays and said the year would pass unnoticed. But deep down, she knew she wasn't, and they would be put to the test. She believed then that life was easy and everything would be the same in a year. A month passed, the second after her departure to Paris. Calls between them became less frequent. Everyone had their own life. She studied and he worked. She lived for herself and her father. He lived and worked for her. Every time they talked, John would invite her over and ask her to come over at least for the weekend. But Julie never showed up, citing a bunch of cases, girlfriends' birthdays, and other excuses. She asked John to wait a little bit longer. "Soon, very soon we will meet again," she said on the phone. John understood that a year away was a test of their relationship. He trusted Julie, but it was a waste. At one of the parties, Julie had a few drinks and couldn't resist a burning brunette who was also clearly interested in her. She soon forgot about John. She felt no remorse. She thought the distance had already extinguished the feelings between them. But John did not think so. He tried and worked for Julie. A year passed. Julie came home. She couldn't hide her affair from John. She'd have a hard time living with it. She knew it. She didn't think she was cheating either. Julie's news crushed John. All his efforts were not in vain. His goal was more important than the girls, meeting with friends. He loved Julie very much and tried to please her. He became the head architect and was able to open his firm. This was a good lesson for John. It wasn't long ago. Julie was on a plane with her father. She had a seizure and cramps. She only remembered waking up in a room with her head bandaged. The attack was based on a developing tumor that caught essential parts of the brain. The plane was urgently grounded, and Julie was hospitalized in the hospital. She did not remember any of this. She was taken to the operating table unconscious. There was an operation for many hours without bringing her to her senses. Everyone was there except John. It's been a long time since John's met the girl who fell in love with him. Perhaps she did not love him if he were that student from the past who had nothing. Now he has become a prosperous architect. He had his own design office. Soon, he and his girlfriend had a great wedding and a beautiful girl. John and his family moved into a big country house that he bought for his family. Meanwhile, Julie was having a hard time. All the parties went to zero. Friends visited her, but she didn't need to. Her life was filled with treatment, hospital beds, and medication. She fought for her life every day. Because of her illness, her hair fell out. She had to get a wig. She became shy about her appearance. She lost a lot of weight. She could not help but look into the mirror. Now, she could only dream of dating boys. It was hard for her to tell anyone about her illness and fate, especially John, how she lacked his support. But she couldn't even call. After all, she did such a bad thing to him then. She had a bad relationship with her father because Julie decided to freeze her egg. She made this decision herself and lay on the operating table. Her father was outraged and displeased with her father's rash actions. Julie was being treated with powerful drugs that killed her chances of staying pregnant. The egg was stored in a particular medical bank, the storage of which had to be paid every year. She hoped for a happy future. She wanted to marry and have a child someday. Sometimes she was called and asked to sell an egg to a same-sex family. Of course, she would not accept such offers. Julie hoped and dreamed of a child. She followed John's life through social media. Her life stopped at those student years before the accident, while John's life was evolving daily. His life was like the one they dreamed of together. They wanted a girl to call Mary. Everything remained in Julie's memories. As the years passed, Julie was left alone. Her friends also split up and started families. The occasional meeting with a friend was as uninteresting to Julie as possible. Julie never got over John. One day, John learned about Julie's situation from people he knew. He was told of a complex illness and an argument with her father, who had stopped helping her. Her dad got married for the third time, and Julie was all grown up, and she had to take care of herself. Her father had less contact with her because he had a new family. Julie bought a small apartment with Dad's money to live independently and earn her own money. It was the last gift from him. She did not have enough money to furnish the living room. Young people were interested in her, but the relationship did not last long. Julie, who was at university, had a lot of issues. She couldn't find anything in the boys that had ever hooked her in John. His humility, dedication, care, confidence, and dissimilarity were her captives of her. Such qualities were not present in any of them. No one could give her the feelings she felt with John, and she no longer felt like a young, beautiful, and promising girl. But one day, she got a doorbell. It was a furniture store messenger. She brought everything that could be arranged in the apartment. Tables, chairs, bed, headset. Everything was quality and expensive. Julie couldn't afford such furniture. She didn't know who it was from, but she could only guess. It's a gift from John, she thought. There was no note, not a single call from John. He did well despite Julie's actions in the past. Julie began to teach English to children and teenagers. It turned out that the study the father hoped for was unsuitable for his daughter's interests, and it was hard to get settled with such a specialty. Her salary was enough for food and household supplies. She could no longer afford the luxurious life she used to have. There was no time for such a life either. She had to pay the bills and gas and support herself. She had enough problems. There was no help from whom to expect. Every day, Julie would return to her apartment in the evenings, where no one was expecting her. Soon, Julie met one man and married him. They never had children. He loved her, and that was enough for her. It was a modest and quiet life without John. It was as if they had switched places with John. That wasn't, though. Julie had lost everything she had. Oh, if I had stayed then, she thought. But to return the time was impossible, and to regret what had been done was also wrong. She could not forget John. His life was happy and prosperous, unlike Julie's everyday life. If John hadn't met her, things might not have worked out so well for him. Was John happy? She could only guess. The stimulus and the goal always amaze the works, and the excellent result. Two fates, and so different. Someone rises, and someone has to fall. But the main thing is not to crash, but to get up and continue your way. In life, there are ups and downs. They only make you stronger and give you a chance to start over. Sometimes, decisions can turn your life around in ways you didn't expect. So, before you make a decision, evaluate the situation and think twice. You can offend someone close to you. You can break yourself or another's life. You don't have to jump to conclusions. Don't do what others want. Do what you want. Listen to yourself first. No one will live life for you. You make the rules for yourself. A ray of sunshine broke through a small gap between the gray curtains and blinded Mary. She hadn't slept in a long time because her stepfather came home late from work, and, as usual, he lectured his mother for a long time. Mary never understood why her mother chose to marry this ugly and intrusive man, and she had 4 children with him, her younger sisters and brothers. Her mother was a kind and gentle woman, but very soft, and she could not resist her husband. All Mary knew about her father was that he was the first love of a very young Jessica, and left the day she found out Jessica was pregnant. Mary didn't want to get up because she didn't sleep and had to work all day. After graduating high school, her stepfather put her in the store as an assistant. Mary liked to study, but Harry Thompson did not want to pay for her further education. The girl dreamed of becoming a designer. She painted well that even school teachers often sent her work to competitions. On the shelf among the school notebooks and books, Mary had letters of thanks that she was very proud of. Her mother quietly went into her daughter's room and practically gestured that she needed to get up. Mary dressed, cleaned herself up, and caught a glimpse of her weariness and lack of sleep. Avoiding her stepfather, she burrowed into the kitchen, swallowed a sandwich, said goodbye to her mother, and left the apartment. The street was sunny and quite warm, despite September. The shop in which she worked was a 30-minute walk away. Mary took her time because she had a decent time. She strolled, thinking about everything, when suddenly she remembered that she had left her phone at home. She didn't want to come back, but she needed the phone too because, in between jobs, she managed to listen to a free intensive course for aspiring designers. Yet, deep down, Mary never gave up her dream of becoming a designer, so she decided to come back. The girl walked back so quickly that she ran into a young man who had just muttered in response to Mary's apology. Out of breath, she called the apartment, whose door could not open for a long time. Her stepfather was already asleep. Her mother was gathering the children for school. Mary grabbed the phone and ran to work. Mr. Alford, the clothing and shoe store owner, took a hard look at the late Mary, but said nothing. The girl slipped into the staff room and quickly changed her clothes. Her task was to keep the store clean and help the sellers. The store was on a busy street, so there were many visitors, and Mary ran between the clothing and shoe counters from morning to evening. So she came across one of her clients and thought she'd seen this man somewhere before. It was a young guy from the street who she ran into in a hurry and who seemed to recognize her too. He smiled and said, "Hey, can you stop knocking me down?" Mary was very embarrassed and blushed, but she didn't say anything. It must be noted that she was always embarrassed when young people paid attention to her, although she was beautiful. Blue eyes, white skin, and a proper nose gave her face a nice look. But she didn't even dare look at the young man and went to the other side of the hall. What a surprise it was when, after work, she saw that guy again at the door. Now he was embarrassed and barely heard him say, "I'm sorry, but can I walk you home?" Mary was embarrassed again and said nothing, heading towards the house. The young man followed her. "Don't think about it. I have no evil thoughts. I just liked you very much. I was afraid you would leave, so I waited for you. My name is Ryan. What's your name again?" Mary knew it was wrong to meet on the street, but she gave her name without knowing why. That was the beginning of their acquaintance. Ryan was now waiting for Mary the evening after work, and they went for a walk through the darkening streets. Mary learned that Ryan worked for a management company and that he was the only son in the family. The young people soon became mutually sympathetic. For Mary, their meetings were an outlet where she could take her mind off family matters. She was already dreaming of leaving her home, where there was little room for her because of her stepfather. They could talk about anything with Ryan, and they seemed to understand each other with half a word. And then the day came when Ryan met Mary and invited her to a cafe near the store. As soon as they sat down at the table, he made a small order and looked at Mary very significantly as soon as the waiter left. The girl was surprised, but did not say anything. "Dear Mary, you and I have known each other for 3 months. That's not enough to get to know each other. I love you." Mary blushed. Tears came out, and through them she whispered, "Me too." 2 months later, Mary and Ryan were married. The wedding was modest in the same cafe where the proposal was made. Only the closest and most few friends came. The young people first rented an apartment, but after a while, they took out a loan and bought a small, cozy apartment on a quiet street. Mary couldn't believe her happiness. At last, she is her mistress, without a grumpy and rude stepfather who counts every penny and never lets go of anything to reproach Mary and her mother. Mary had furnished her family's nest, although at first they lived very modestly, but the apartment was always clean, cozy, and smelled delicious. A year later, their son Mark was born, which Mary doted on. Amid her maternal feelings, Mary seems to have missed something in her relationship with her husband. Ryan was coming home more and more late than usual. He stayed with friends and went out on Sunday night with his buddies. At first, Mary did not pay much attention to this, explaining it to her husband's fatigue and workload. But one day, Ryan returned and confessed that he'd been fired from his job. From that moment on, a dark chapter in their life together began. Ryan refused to look for a new job, believing that he had been unfairly fired and feeling sorry for himself for a long time. Mary was very supportive of him, but soon realized that the reason was that he didn't want to work. 2 months later, he just got used to living like this, and Mary was woefully short of money to support herself and her son. The funds provided by the state was not enough, and she stopped expecting support from her husband. 6 months had passed. Mary was relatively low, and then she decided to find a job. She left that job when her son was born, and finding a new one wasn't easy because she didn't have an education. She also had to leave the baby with someone. Ryan was afraid to keep the baby. Her mother was living with 4 children, and Ryan's parents, it turned out, were not keen on participating in the lives of their son and grandson. And yet, Mary got her mother to sit with Mark for a couple of hours while her stepdad was at work. And she was running around the organizations and offices asking that she be taken at least a cleaner. But they did not want to take this position. And, having completely despaired, she crossed the threshold only to open Hotel Monroe. She was met in the hall by a female administrator who told her that they only wanted cleanup girls who were responsible and decent. Mary agreed and was sent to the manager, who turned out to be a lovely young man. He listened attentively to Mary and, for some reason, felt a great deal of sympathy for her and decided that it would be okay if she were accepted as a maid. Mary seemed to him to be a friendly and tidy girl. Happy and satisfied, Mary was walking home. For some reason, she felt a new life was beginning for her. Ryan wasn't home. His mother said he'd gone away in a car, and she packed up and rushed home. Mary put her son to bed and went to sleep herself. In the middle of the night, she heard a noise and voices outside the door. Mary opened the door and saw her husband's friends Tom and Brian. "Mary, don't worry, it's not that bad." This made Mary nervous and dizzy. Ryan was in a car accident. He hit a man on the street. Now he's at the police station. "Dead?" Mary whispered with her white lips. "What?" Tom didn't get it. "Hit him to death?" asked Mary, afraid to hear the answer. "No, but a man with a concussion, broken arm and leg." Mary breathed a sigh of relief, though she felt it was a temporary relief and all the difficulties lay ahead. She asked a neighbor to look after her son and went to the station. Ryan sat with his head down and was interrogated, but was released in the morning. Mary didn't ask him about the details of the accident. According to the coroner, Ryan was responsible for the accident, hit another car, and drove to the side of the road. The man was also walking in the wrong direction, but it didn't diminish Ryan's guilt. "What are we going to do?" Ryan asked Mary in confusion, as if she were the one who should know the answer. "Let us break through," answered his wife, and everything trembled with anxiety inside her. A series of interrogations, calls to the station, and meetings with a lawyer. The victim, the man, did not want to meet with Ryan and his lawyer and asked for possible and unthinkable amounts of physical and moral damage. Even if Mary and Ryan had sold everything, they wouldn't have that kind of money. Money was sorely lacking. Mary borrowed money from everyone who could help her, but it wasn't enough. They were waiting the court's final decision, which would determine how much to pay to the aggrieved man. It was Ryan's day to make amends, almost as good as their apartment. They had to make a decision. No one could help them. Mary was sitting on the couch. Her face was stone. Ryan dared not even look at his wife. After a profound silence, he said, "We need to sell the apartment. Part of the amount will be used to repay the loan, and most of the money will have to be paid to Manson, the victim's name." Mary was silent. She had nothing to say. She knew Ryan had no other choice. At that moment, she hated him for his cowardice, laziness, and infantility. "What about Mark and me? Where are we going to live? Have you thought about that?" "But I have no other options. Otherwise, I will be put in prison. Do you want this? Of course, you would live here at your pleasure, and I sit behind the cage," he cried out. "You hit a man. You're to blame," said Mary. "Where am I going with my son? We have no savings, only debts." Mary went into the kitchen and cried. She seemed more miserable and miserable than ever. And Mark, her poor child, will wander in search of a home. But very soon Mary came to her senses. She was always strong, and she will not give up now. "Okay, sell the apartment. Only I have a condition. I'm filing for divorce. I will not live with a man who has traded family for friends and poker. You refused to work when I was running around town begging for a job, and you were driving around the city with your buddies. I feel condemned and my son to poverty." Ryan stared at Mary with disbelief. A month later, they divorced in court. Ryan sold the apartment, paid a fine, and disappeared. Mary was left with her son in her arms on the street. Her mother felt sorry for her and called her home, but as soon as her stepfather saw Mary and Mark at home, he said, "You stay here tonight, and tomorrow you'll be gone. I don't need more mouths in this house." All night Mary did not sleep, and in the morning left Mark with her mother and went to work in Monroe. Without looking at anyone, she went to the manager's office and knocked on the door. "Yes, come in," said a familiar voice. "Mr. Castle, I have a challenging situation. I have no place to live with my son. If you let me and my child stay temporarily in the hotel, I can work overtime. Then I will solve the housing issue." Mr. Castle listened very carefully to Mary, and she cried. She had not called since that episode in the kitchen. She held on as best she could. "I'm sorry, it's my nerves." "Well, Mrs. Brooke, I'll make sure you have a room." Mary left with confidence. At least for a while, they will have a roof over their head, and there she will get out. The next day, Mary moved into a small room, which was a staff room. There was one big bed, a table, and a wardrobe. Nothing else could fit there, but Mary was pleased about that too. She was helped by sympathetic maids who looked after her son. A month had passed. One day she had a phone call. It was Ryan. He was drunk and demanded to see his son. He promised to sue for a time to see him. Mary's attempts to talk him out of it didn't help. "If you don't want to give me your son, then pay me the money," he shouted. Mary knew her son didn't want to see his father, so she said, "Okay, I'll only pay you if you disappear from our lives." "I promise," said the ex-husband. Mary hung up and wondered where she would get the money to pay off her hateful ex-husband. Mr. Castle, she thought. Mary realized it was risky to use the manager's kindness, but there was no way out. She decided to ask him for money and get away from Ryan forever. At that moment, someone knocked on their room door. "Come in," said Mary, in surprise, and even more surprised to see Mr. Castle at the door. What a coincidence, she thought. "I was passing by and thought I'd see how you were settling in," said the manager calmly. "Thank you. Well, thanks to you," said Mary, embarrassed. "You don't need anything, Mr. Brooke?" No, we have everything." "Why do you look worried?" "Yes, it is echoes of the past. The ex-husband asks for money, so he does not demand to see his son, and I do not want him to have his influence on him." It was in Mary's mind to ask about the money, but she didn't say anything, and the manager probably didn't think it was polite to ask her if she had any money. He glanced at the wall above the bed and saw a collage of superheroes on the wall. Mary was drawing this so that her son wouldn't be so bored. Mary caught his eye. "Mr. Castle, if it's too much, I'll wipe it all down. The paint's off easy." No, it's wonderful." After another minute, the manager said goodbye and left. The next day, after cleaning the rooms, Mary hurried down the hall to her room, when suddenly she was called and told that the manager was waiting for her in the office. Mary was alarmed, thinking it was about the painted wall. She entered the manager's office. Her fears were partially justified, but that's not what Mr. Castle was saying. "Mrs. Brooke, I appreciate your artistic ability and would like to suggest that you do the same with the wall in the children's playroom on the second floor of our hotel. Of course, the payment will be different than the one you received as a maid. Do you agree?" "Mr. Castle, but I have absolutely no artistic training, and I'm not sure." "Mrs. Brooke, do you agree or not?" "Yes," said Mary. For a whole week, Mary had been testing her art muse, and by the admission of many, everything worked out perfectly. The children's room became lively and colorful thanks to Mary's drawings. Her work was well paid for, and she paid off her husband, who called her almost every day. Having seen Mary's talent, the manager offered her a place as a decorator at the hotel. Mary agreed because it was her dream to become a designer. It was hard to start, but she could do it. She worked even at night. She was learning in parallel. Mark grew up. Mary took him to kindergarten. They left the hotel room when they were better off with the money. Mary rented an apartment near her mother so she could come to her daughter comfortably. Thus, day after day, difficult times and painful memories faded into the past. Now, every day was bright for Mary. Happiness with its warm rays touched her face. Good things were beginning in her life and continued. Soon, she went from Mrs. Brooke to Mrs. Castle, but